I was cheated by my best friend and fiancé who fell in love behind my back, but years later, I returned as a tech CEO, faced them at a global summit, and showed them what real success looks like. Betrayal doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's a shadow you don't see until it's too late. Ethan learned that the hard way, but it started years earlier in a cramped MIT lecture hall where he and Ryan were already thick as thieves. Second year, both 20, they were two small-town kids who'd stumbled into a friendship over late-night code and cheap beer. Ethan, wiry and sharp-eyed behind his glasses, could debug a program in his sleep. Ryan, all charm and restless energy, could sell a half-baked idea to anyone. They were a perfect pair. Ethan the mind, Ryan the mouth, dreaming of the day they'd outcode the world. "Ethan, hackathon this weekend," Ryan said, tossing a pen across their shared desk. His voice cut through the professor's drone. "Recruiters, free food. You game?" Ethan smirked. "Only if you promise not to crash our demo again." Ryan laughed, loud enough to draw stares. "That was one time. You're never letting it go, huh?" It was their rhythm. Jabs that landed soft, trust that ran deep. They'd spent a year building apps in dorm basements, sneaking into labs, plotting to disrupt Silicon Valley before they could legally drink. Ethan envied Ryan's ease, the way he owned every room. Ryan leaned on Ethan's precision, his ability to turn wild ideas into reality. Together, they were unstoppable. The hackathon was chaos, tables strewn with cables, air thick with coffee and stress. Ethan and Ryan staked out a corner, sketching a pitch for a predictive text app. When she walked up, "I'm Chloe," she said, dropping her backpack with a thud. "You two look semi-competent. Need a third? I do machine learning, UI, and I can pitch without tripping over my ego." Ryan raised an eyebrow, grinning. "Big talk. You coded anything worth stealing yet?" Chloe didn't blink. "Built an app that'd eat yours for breakfast. You in or out?" Ethan laughed, breaking the standoff. "I like her. I'm Ethan, this is Ryan. Join us. We're coding something that might not suck." She slid into their orbit like she'd always belonged. Over 48 hours, they were a storm of ideas. Chloe spotting bugs before Ethan could, designing interfaces that made Ryan whistle. She matched their pace, her focus relentless, her humor dry enough to keep them grounded. Their app took second place, but the real prize was the bond. By the end, they were a trio, trading inside jokes and Red Bull cans, promising to build something bigger next time. Months blurred into late nights. They'd pile into Ryan's dorm, Chloe on the floor with her laptop, Ethan cross-legged on a couch, Ryan pacing as he ranted about tech giants or bad sci-fi. They coded until their eyes burned, Chloe's playlist drowning out the world, Ethan's quips cutting through their exhaustion. Ryan pushed them to dream bigger, pitching to professors, gate-crashing elite meetups. Chloe kept them real, her logic ruthless. Ethan held them together, the steady hand when tempers flared. But something shifted when Ethan and Chloe got closer. It started small, her smile lingering when he spoke, his hand brushing hers over a shared keyboard. One night, under a sky heavy with spring stars, he asked her out, heart pounding. "It took you long enough," she said, her laugh soft. She kissed him before he could second guess. They told Ryan the next day. He slung an arm around Ethan, grinning. "Finally, man, Chloe's way out of your league, but I'm rooting for you." Ethan chuckled, shoving him off. "Keep dreaming, Ree. She'd chew you up." Ryan's laugh was loud, but his eyes flickered, something sharp gone in a blink. Ethan missed it. He was too busy falling. The trio stayed tight, but the air changed. Ryan got louder, his jokes edging toward cruel. He'd tease Ethan about being whipped, then pull Chloe into hugs that lasted too long. "She's the real genius," he'd say, arm around her shoulders, his grin daring Ethan to react. Chloe laughed it off, her ease unchanged. But Ethan started noticing things. The way Ryan watched her when she wasn't looking, the way her voice softened when she said his name, tiny cracks, barely there, easy to dismiss. They were brothers, weren't they? And Chloe was his. What could break that? Late at night, alone in his dorm, Ethan replayed their days. Ryan's, hand on Chloe's wrist, her glance lingering a beat too long. He told himself it was nothing, just his head playing tricks. But doubt, once planted, grows in the dark. Ethan stood at the edge of the Charles River, the Boston skyline glinting across the water. His palms were damp, the small velvet box in his pocket heavier than it had any right to be. 2 years after that hackathon, he and Chloe were a constant, her laugh his anchor, her mind his match. They graduated MIT, landed tech jobs, and built a life of late-night takeout and shared dreams. Tonight, he'd ask her to make it forever. He'd planned it for weeks, wanting something big enough to match how she made him feel, but personal enough to feel like them. The Esplanade was their spot, where they'd walked after their first date, where she'd teased him for overanalyzing the stars. He'd roped in friends to set up fairy lights along the path, a soft glow against the dusk. A guitarist strummed nearby, one of Chloe's favorite songs looping quietly. It wasn't a flash mob or a jumbotron, just enough to say he'd thought about her, every detail. Ryan had been all in, as always. "You're proposing?" he'd said when Ethan told him, eyes wide. "Man, that's huge. I'm on it, lights, music, whatever you need." He'd helped string the lights, even sweet-talked a park official into looking the other way. Ethan hadn't thought twice about it. Ryan was his best man, figuratively and soon enough. Chloe arrived in a green sweater, her hair loose, catching the evening breeze. "What's all this?" she asked, spotting the lights, her smile curious but warm. Ethan took her hand, his throat tight. "Walk with me." They strolled the path, the city hum fading behind them. He talked about their first coding project, how she'd rewritten his sloppy algorithm and stolen his heart in the same move. She laughed, leaning into him, oblivious to the ring burning a hole in his pocket. At the path's end, where the lights framed a bench they'd once claimed for hours, he stopped. "Chloe," he said, voice steady despite his racing pulse. He dropped to one knee, pulling out the ring, a simple band with a single diamond, like her, elegant and unyielding. "You're my partner, my challenge, my home. Marry me?" Her breath caught, eyes shining. For a heartbeat he thought she'd hesitate, but then she was nodding, pulling him up, kissing him hard. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, Ethan." Friends cheered from the shadows, snapping photos, but Ethan barely heard them. It was just her, always her. The engagement party was a week later, at a rooftop bar Ryan had picked. He'd gone overboard, stringing lights, again a playlist Chloe loved, even a custom cocktail named the Coder's Knot. Ethan watched him work the room, clinking glasses, telling stories about their college days. Ryan was in his element, charming Chloe's coworkers, Ethan's cousins, even the bartender. But Ethan noticed how often he gravitated to Chloe. She was radiant, in a navy dress that hugged her frame, laughing as Ryan spun her on the makeshift dance floor. "Careful, Rye," she teased, swatting his arm. "You're gonna make Ethan jealous." Ryan grinned, winking at Ethan across the room. "Nah, he knows I'm just keeping you warm for him." Ethan laughed, raising his beer, but something stuck, like a note played off key. Ryan's hand lingered on Chloe's waist a beat too long. Her smile, when she looked at him, held something Ethan couldn't name. Not joy, not love, but a secret shared in plain sight. He shook it off. This was Ryan, his brother. Chloe, his fiancée. Doubt had no place here. Later, Ethan found them by the railing, heads bent close, talking low. The city sprawled below, indifferent. He approached, catching the tail of Ryan's words. "Always knew you'd say yes." Chloe's laugh was soft, her hand brushing Ryan's sleeve. "What's this, a conspiracy?" Ethan said, keeping his tone light. Chloe turned, her smile quick but not wide. "Just Ryan being ridiculous. Telling me you were a nervous wreck planning tonight." Ryan clapped Ethan's shoulder. "Had to make sure she didn't bolt, man. You're welcome." Ethan pulled Chloe close, her warmth grounding him. But as Ryan's grin held, too bright, too sharp, Ethan felt it again. That shadow from college, slipping through the cracks of their happiness. Ethan had always believed love was a choice, a commitment you built, line by line, like clean code. He'd chosen Chloe every day since that hackathon, through late nights debugging their dreams, through mornings tangled in her laughter. 3 months after the proposal, he still caught himself staring at the ring on her finger, marveling that she'd chosen him back. But love, he'd learn, could unravel faster than it was written. It was a Sunday evening, the kind of quiet that felt too heavy for spring. They were in their Cambridge apartment, a one-bedroom cluttered with books and half-built prototypes. Ethan was on the couch, tweaking an algorithm for work, while Chloe stood at the kitchen counter chopping vegetables for dinner. The knife's rhythm was off, too slow, too deliberate. He noticed it before he noticed her silence. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing up. Her back was to him, shoulders stiff. She didn't turn. The knife paused, hovering over a carrot. "Ethan," she said, her voice low, like she was testing the weight of his name. "We need to talk." His stomach twisted, but he closed his laptop, forcing a smile. "Sounds serious. What's up?" She set the knife down, wiping her hands on a towel, and finally faced him. Her eyes, usually so sharp, were clouded, guarded in a way he'd never seen. She crossed the room, sitting on the chair opposite him, not the couch. The distance felt deliberate. "I don't know how to say this," she started, fingers knotting in her lap. "I've been trying to find the right words, but there aren't any. I'm..." I'm in love with Ryan. The room didn't move, but Ethan felt it tilt. His pulse roared in his ears, drowning out the hum of the fridge, the distant traffic. He stared at her, waiting for the punchline, for her to laugh and say it was a bad joke. But her face was stone, sorry, but certain. Ryan? He repeated, the name jagged in his throat. Our Ryan? My best friend Ryan. She nodded, eyes dropping to the floor. It wasn't planned, it just happened. Over time. I didn't want to hurt you, but I can't keep pretending. Pretending? His voice cracked. Chloe, you said yes. You're wearing my ring, we're planning a life, and you're telling me you're in love with him? I know, she whispered. I thought I could make it work. I love you, Ethan, I do. But it's different with Ryan. It's more. The word landed like a blade, clean and deep. He saw flashes. Ryan's arm around her at the engagement party, her soft laugh by the railing, glances he'd dismissed as nothing. All this time, the shadow he'd ignored had been growing, and now it was here, tearing everything apart. How long, he asked, barely audible. She hesitated. A while, before the proposal. We didn't act on it, not really, but the feelings were there. Before the proposal. Before he'd knelt by the river, poured his soul into a ring. Before Ryan had strung lights and toasted their future. Ethan's chest burned, not with anger but with something heavier. Grief, raw and shapeless. He'd lost her, yes, but Ryan too. His partner, his brother, both gone in a single sentence. He stood, needing to move, to outrun the weight crushing him. So what now? You're leaving me for him? Chloe's eyes welled up, but her voice held steady. I don't know what's next. I just know I can't marry you, not like this. You deserve the truth. The truth. He almost laughed at how small it sounded, how it couldn't begin to carry the wreckage it caused. He wanted to scream, to demand why him, why now, why them? But the questions choked him, pointless against her certainty. I need air, he said, grabbing his jacket. She didn't stop him. Outside, the city was indifferent. Cars honking, strangers brushing past. He walked until his legs ached, replaying every moment he'd missed. Ryan's two-on-one, hugs, Chloe's fleeting glances. The signs had been there, and he'd been too blind, too trusting to see them. He'd built his world on them both, and now it was rubble. Back home, hours later, Chloe was still there, sitting in the dark. Ethan, she started, but he raised a hand. Don't. He pulled the ring from his pocket. He'd been carrying it, a habit from the proposal night, and set it on the table. It's over. You and me, we're done. She nodded, tears falling now, but said nothing. He wanted her to fight, to beg, but she didn't. That hurt worse than the confession. And Ryan? He asked, voice hollow. You going to him? I don't know, she said, but I can't stay here. He didn't ask her to leave. He didn't need to. By morning, her things were gone. Clothes, laptop, the coffee mug she'd loved. The apartment felt gutted, like his chest. He thought about calling Ryan, confronting him, demanding answers. But what was the point? Words wouldn't undo the betrayal, wouldn't rebuild the trust they'd shattered. Instead, he packed his own bag, left the keys with the landlord, and walked away. Not from them, but from the version of himself who'd believed love was enough. The pain didn't leave. It burrowed deep, a quiet ache he'd carry like a scar. He didn't cry, didn't rage. He just kept moving, because stopping meant feeling it all, and he wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Ethan didn't cry when Chloe left, nor when he heard Ryan had moved in with her a month later. The pain was there, a dull blade lodged in his ribs. But he'd learned early that grief was a luxury he couldn't afford. Growing up in a Rust Belt town where dreams rusted faster than the factories, he'd watched his parents grind through life, never breaking, never bending. That was his inheritance, not tears but motion. So he moved. San Francisco was 1,000 miles from Cambridge, far enough to blur the ghosts. He arrived with a duffel bag, a laptop, and a vague plan to build something new. The city was a frenzy of ambition. Coders in hoodies, VCs in loafers, all chasing the next big thing. Ethan rented a closet-sized room in the Mission, the kind of place where the walls hummed with neighbor noise and the rent ate half his saving. It didn't matter. He wasn't here to live. He was here to work. The idea came late one night, fueled by black coffee and the ache of betrayal. He'd always been fascinated by AI, its ability to find patterns where humans saw chaos. What if he could build a system that didn't just predict, but adapted, learned from mistakes, grew stronger, like he needed to? He sketched the framework on a napkin, a neural network for real-time data analysis, flexible enough for finance, healthcare, anything. It wasn't about fame or fortune, it was about control, about creating something no one could take away. The first months were brutal. He coded alone in a co-working space that smelled of burnt toast, surrounded by startups with ping-pong tables and founders who spoke in buzzwords. His savings dwindled, forcing him to skip meals, to barter skills for server access. The code fought him. Bugs that multiplied like roaches, algorithms that choked on edge cases. He'd stare at error logs until his eyes burned, the screen blurring into memories of Chloe's laugh, Ryan's grin. Those nights, the pain flared sharp, but he didn't linger. He debugged it like a bad line of code, ruthless and precise. He called it ashes in his head, a private nod to what he'd lost. Officially, it was Nexus. Clean, marketable, a name investors might bite on. By month 6, he had a prototype. Clunky but functional. He pitched it to anyone who'd listen, accelerators, angel investors, even a shady guy in a coffee shop who claimed he knew people. Most said no. Too risky, too niche, too unproven. One VC, a woman with a steel gaze, told him, "You're not selling a product, you're selling yourself. Show me you won't break." He didn't break. He rewrote the pitch, streamlined the code, worked nights as a freelance developer to pay the bills. He slept 4 hours, ate instant noodles, ignored the texts from old college friends asking where he'd gone. The isolation was a choice. Trust was a liability he couldn't afford. But the work was honest. Every line of code, every fixed bug, was a brick in a wall against the past. Failure came often. A demo crashed mid-pitch, costing him a potential seed round. A server outage wiped a week's progress. Once, exhaustion hit so hard he passed out at his desk, waking to a coworker shaking him, asking if he was okay. "Fine," he lied, and kept coding. The pain of betrayal didn't vanish. But it changed less. A wound, more a pulse, driving him forward. He wasn't running from Chloe or Ryan, he was building something they couldn't touch. A year in, the tide shifted. A small accelerator took a chance, giving him $50,000, 0 cents, and a mentor who didn't sugarcoat him. "You've got grit," she said. "But grit's not enough. Hire a team." Ethan hesitated. Relying on others felt like inviting cracks, but he couldn't scale alone. He brought on 2 coders, both hungry, neither asking about his past. They worked out of a garage, sleeping on cots when deadlines loomed. Nexus grew, faster, smarter, catching eyes. By year 2, they had a beta. A healthcare startup signed on, then a fintech firm. Ethan learned to pitch without flinching, to smile when investors asked why he worked like he was haunted. "Just driven," he'd say, and they'd nod, impressed. He didn't tell them about the nights he still woke gasping, dreaming of a ring on a table, a door closing. He didn't need to. The work spoke for him. He wasn't healed, scars don't vanish. But he wasn't hollow either. Heartbreak had been fuel, not fire. It pushed him to create, to stand taller than the man who'd walked away from Cambridge. San Francisco's skyline glittered outside his window now, a reminder he'd built something from nothing. Not vengeance, not redemption. Just proof he could keep going. 5 years after Ethan landed in San Francisco with a duffel and a grudge, Nexus was no longer a dream scribbled on a napkin. It was a name whispered in boardrooms, a system that turned raw data into gold for hospitals, banks, and logistics firms. Ethan's startup had outgrown the garage, then the co-working space, and now filled a sleek office in Soma glass walls, ergonomic chairs, a view of the Bay Bridge that made clients pause. At 30, Ethan was CEO of a company valued at $200 million, 0 cents, his face on tech magazine covers with headlines like, "The Quiet Genius Behind Nexus." He'd built it from ashes, and it stood tall. The office hummed on a crisp October morning, developers hunched over monitors, a product manager pitching a new feature to a cluster of interns. Ethan leaned against a whiteboard, sketching an update to their core algorithm. His team, now 40 strong, moved around him, a machine he'd assembled with care. He trusted them, not with his heart but with his vision. That was enough. "Boss," said Priya, his CTO, tossing a tablet his way, "Forbes wants a quote for their 30 under 30 piece. You gonna play nice this time?" Ethan caught the tablet, smirking. "Only if they stop calling me a prodigy. Makes me sound like I'm 12. She laughed. "Better than reclusive. That's what TechCrunch went with last month." He shrugged, handing the tablet back. He didn't chase the spotlight, didn't need to. Nexus spoke for itself. A major healthcare provider had just signed a 7-figure deal, and a European bank was circling. Meetings stacked his calendar. His inbox overflowed with invites to summits, panels, dinners with VCs who smelled the next unicorn. He said yes to enough to keep the company growing, no to the rest. Success wasn't about noise. It was about substance. He'd learned to wear the role well. Gone were the hoodies and all-nighters. He owned tailored blazers now, kept his glasses polished. He spoke with a calm that disarmed skeptics, led with a clarity that inspired his team. But alone, in his minimalist apartment overlooking the city, he was still the guy who'd walked away from Cambridge. The pain hadn't vanished. It had settled, a low hum beneath his pulse. He didn't dwell on it. There was too much to do. That afternoon, he was skimming a contract when Priya dropped a bombshell, casual as gossip. Hey, you know that guy from your MIT days, Ryan something? Saw a post about him getting married. Bally, big deal, whole influencer vibe. Ethan's pen froze mid-signature. Ryan, Chloe. The names hit like a skipped heartbeat, sharp but fleeting. Yeah? He said, voice even. Good for them. Gia raised an eyebrow. You're not curious? Looked like a circus. Flower arches, drone shots. Her dress was everywhere online. He forced a smile, signing the contract with a flourish. Not really my scene. You got those server specs for the new client? She took the hint, pivoting to work, but the air felt heavier now. Bali. He could picture it. Ryan in a linen suit, all charm and swagger. Chloe radiant, her laugh carrying over the waves. He didn't need to see the posts. They'd built their happiness on the wreckage of his trust, and now they'd sealed it with vows. The thought didn't burn like it once would have. It just was. That night he poured a whiskey and stood by his window, the city a constellation of ambition below. He didn't Google the wedding, didn't need to. A colleague had mentioned it weeks ago, a passing comment about Ethan's old crew trending for their over-the-top ceremony. He'd nodded then, too, and changed the subject. Closure wasn't a post he could scroll past. It was the life he'd built instead. He turned from the window, setting the glass down untouched. Tomorrow was a board meeting, then a pitch to a logistics giant. Nexus was on the cusp of something bigger, a new module that could redefine predictive analytics. That was his focus, his truth. Ryan and Chloe were a chapter closed, their story irrelevant to the one he was writing. As he shut off the light, the hum of his past faded against the steady rhythm of his present. He'd risen not to prove them wrong, but to prove himself right. Ethan's inbox was a battlefield, hundreds of emails daily, most ignored, some flagged for later, a few demanding his immediate attention. Invite to Pinnacle arrived on a Wednesday, nestled between a VC's pitch and a product update. The subject line was simple. You're invited. Pinnacle Summit for Tech Innovators. He almost deleted it, assuming another overhyped conference. But the sender's name, Lila Chen, a legend in AI circles, made him pause. He opened it. Dear Mr. Caldwell, it began. Your work with Nexus has redefined adaptive analytics. We'd be honored to have you join us at Pinnacle, an exclusive gathering of the industry's elite. 3 days in Aspen, October 15-17. Keynote opportunities available. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the office's hum fading. Pinnacle wasn't just a conference, it was a gatekeeper's club, where deals were born over whiskey and reputations cemented in private dinners. At 31, he'd built Nexus into a $300 million zero-cents company. But this was a new league, CEOs with billions in play, visionaries who didn't just shape markets but rewrote them. Saying yes could open doors to partnerships, funding, maybe even a global pivot for Nexus. Saying no risked staying on the sidelines. He hesitated. Crowds weren't his thing anymore. The past 5 years had taught him to value control over his work, his environment, his heart. Pinnacle meant schmoozing, small talk, exposure. He pictured Chloe's smile, Ryan's laugh, unbidden memories that still surfaced in quiet moments. What if someone there knew them, mentioned them? But he shook it off. This was business, not personal. His past was dead weight, and he'd learned to travel light. He typed a reply. Thank you, Lila. I'm in. Let me know about the keynote. Short, professional, no room for doubt. He hit send before he could overthink it. October came fast. Aspen was crisp, the mountains a blaze of gold against a sky too blue to be real. The summit was at a sprawling resort, all polished wood and glass, the kind of place that screamed money without shouting. Ethan arrived alone, his suitcase light, his mindset focused. He'd prepped for panels, memorized names of key attendees, potential investors, competitors, allies. His goal was simple: elevate Nexus, secure a deal, get out. The lobby buzzed with arrivals, suits shaking hands, badges flashing names he recognized from headlines. He checked in, nodding at a founder who'd just sold her startup for $2 billion, 0 cents. Confidence came easy here. He'd earned his place. He was halfway to the elevator, mentally rehearsing his opening remarks for a panel, when a laugh stopped him cold. It was unmistakable, loud, reckless, the kind that filled a room and demanded attention. Ethan turned, his pulse spiking. There he was, by the concierge desk, in a tailored jacket, gesturing wildly as he told a story. His hair was shorter, flecked with gray, but the grin was the same, the one that had charmed professors, investors, Chloe. And then he saw her. Chloe stood beside him, elegant in a cream coat, her dark hair pulled back, a polite smile on her lips. She looked older, not worn, but refined, like a blade honed by time. Her hand rested on Ryan's arm, a casual touch that carried years of history. They hadn't seen him yet, too caught up in their bubble, but Ethan felt the air shift, like the moment before a storm breaks. He could have walked away. The elevator was steps away, his room a sanctuary. But his feet wouldn't move. 5 years had dulled the pain, but seeing them, together, real, not a memory, was a gut punch he hadn't braced for. Ryan, his brother-in-arms, who'd toasted his engagement while loving his fiancée. Chloe, his everything, who'd chosen someone else. Here they were, at his summit, in his world. A woman approached him, badge-reading Lila Chen. "Ethan Caldwell," she said, extending a hand. "Thrilled you're here, your work's creating waves." He forced a smile, shaking her hand, his eyes flicking back to Ryan and Chloe. "Thanks for the invite. Excited to be here." Lila followed his glance, oblivious to the wait. "Quite a crowd, right? Everyone who's anyone in tech. You'll fit right in." He nodded, words automatic. Ryan's laugh rang out again, and Chloe's head turned, her gaze sweeping the lobby. For a split second their eyes met. Hers widened just enough to betray recognition before she looked away, leaning closer to Ryan. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his face neutral. "You okay?" Lila asked, catching the shift. "Fine," he said, smoother than he felt. "Just jet-lagged. Point me to the schedule?" She launched into details, panels, dinners, the keynote he'd agreed to. But Ethan's mind was split. Why were they here? Ryan had always been a talker, not a builder. His startups fizzled as fast as they flared. Chloe, though, she'd had the mind for it. Was she the one invited? Or were they just plus ones riding someone else's coattails? It didn't matter. They were here, and he'd have to face them. He excused himself from Lila, heading for the elevator. His reflection in the doors was calm, blazer crisp, glasses sharp, but inside, the past churned. He'd come to Pinnacle to build his future, not to dig up ghosts. But as the doors closed, shutting out Ryan's voice, he knew one thing. He wouldn't run. Not this time. The Pinnacle Summit's opening reception was a glittering cage, crystal chandeliers, clinking glasses, and tech titans trading practiced smiles. Ethan stood near a window, the Aspen Mountains looming dark beyond the glass, a whiskey in hand he hadn't touched. He'd planned to work the room, pitch Nexus to a few key players, but his focus frayed the moment he'd seen Ryan and Chloe in the lobby. Now, an hour later, he felt their presence like a static charge, inevitable and close. He was mid-conversation with a chip designer from Seoul when Ryan's voice cut through the hum. "Ethan Caldwell, as I live and breathe." Loud, too loud, the kind of greeting that turned heads. Ethan turned, his face a mask of calm as Ryan strode over, Chloe trailing a step behind. Ryan's grin was wide, but his eyes were sharp, measuring. Chloe's expression was tighter, her hands clasped in front of her navy dress like she was bracing for impact. "Ryan," Ethan said, voice steady. "Chloe. Didn't expect to see you here." He nodded, polite, but his grip on the glass tightened. Ryan clapped his shoulder, a gesture too familiar for the years between them. "Come on, man. Pinnacle's the place to be. You're killing it with Nexus. Had to see the legend in action." Ethan's smile was thin. "Just doing my job. What brings you two?" Ryan launched in before Chloe could speak. "Got a new venture. Blockchain meets AI. Real game changer. Investors are eating it up. Figure Pinnacle's where we close the big ones, right?" He gestured expansively, as if the room were his stage. "Already got a meeting with Andreessen's team tomorrow." Chloe's lips parted, then closed, her eyes flicking to Ryan. Ethan caught it, a flicker of discomfort, maybe doubt. "Sounds ambitious," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "Blockchain's a tough sell these days." Ryan laughed, undeterred. "Not when you've got the vision. You'd get it. Nexus is proof you're a builder. Me? I'm the guy who makes builders shine." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "Bet we could have done something big together back in the day?" The words landed like a jab, laced with history. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't bite. "Maybe," he said, sipping his whiskey for the first time. "But I'm good where I am." Chloe cleared her throat, stepping forward. "Ethan, it's good to see you." Her voice was soft, careful, like she was navigating a minefield. "Nexus sounds incredible. I read the Wired piece." "Thanks," he said, meeting her eyes. They were the same, clear, piercing, but carried weight now, shadows of choices made. He wanted to ask her why she was here, what she'd built, but the words felt like traps. Appreciate that. Ryan slung an arm around Chloe, pulling her close. She's being modest. Chloe's the brains behind our pitch deck. Got VCs drooling before I even opened my mouth. His grin dared Ethan to react, to acknowledge their unit, their win. Ethan didn't flinch. Always was sharp, he said, his gaze steady on Chloe. She looked away, fingers tightening on her clutch. The silence stretched, brittle, until a conference organizer called Ryan's name from across the room. Duty calls, Ryan said, winking. Catch you later, Ethan. We should talk shop, old time's sake. He steered Chloe away, his hand firm on her waist, but she glanced back, just once, her expression unreadable. Ethan exhaled, the tension uncoiling slightly. The chip designer, who'd watched the exchange in silence, raised an eyebrow. Old friends? Something like that, Ethan said, draining his glass. He excused himself, weaving through the crowd to a quieter corner. His pulse was steady, but his mind churned. Ryan's bravado was the same, louder maybe, to mask something fragile. Chloe's quietness, though, was new. She'd always been fierce, direct. What had changed? He didn't want to care. Pinnacle was about Nexus, not them. But the past had claws, and it dug in now, stirring questions he'd buried. He straightened, scanning the room for Lila Chen. Time to refocus, find an investor, nail his panel tomorrow. Ryan could play king, Chloe could hide behind her silence. Ethan wasn't here to unravel their story, he was here to write his own. The second day of Pinnacle dawned sharp, the aspen air carrying a bite that matched the summit's intensity. Ethan stood in a conference room, wrapping a panel on AI ethics, his answers crisp despite the sleepless night. Ryan's bravado and Chloe's guarded glances had lingered like static, disrupting his focus. He'd spent the morning avoiding them, sticking to sessions and sidebars with investors. Nexus was the priority, always was, but the past kept tugging, a thread he couldn't quite cut. He was checking his schedule in the lobby, the hum of deal-making around him, when a ripple ran through the crowd. Heads turned, voices hushed. Sienna looked up, and there she was, Sienna, striding through the entrance like she owned the space. His wife. Sienna was a vision in a tailored emerald blazer, her auburn hair swept into a low chignon, every step radiating purpose. At 33, she was a force, a computational biologist who'd turned her Stanford PhD into a startup that mapped genomes faster than anyone thought possible. They'd met 2 years ago at a TED conference, her keynote dismantling myths about DNA editing while Ethan watched, captivated. She'd challenged his pitch over drinks later, her wit as sharp as her mind. He'd been hers ever since. She spotted him, her smile breaking through the professional veneer, warm and private. Sorry I'm late, she said, crossing to him, her heels clicking on the marble. Flight delays. You surviving this circus? Barely, he said, kissing her cheek. Her presence steadied him like a signal cutting through noise. Glad you're here, place needs you. She laughed, low and knowing. Flattery won't get you out of networking. Lila Chen's been texting me about your keynote. Says you're the star. He shrugged, but his chest warmed. Sienna didn't just support him, she amplified him, her belief in Nexus as fierce as his own. They'd built a life of mutual respect, late nights debating code and ethics, mornings running along the bay. She was his partner, not just in love but in purpose. They moved toward the main hall for the day's plenary, Sienna's arm linked lightly with his. Attendees gravitated to her, founders asking about her latest paper, a VC praising her recent exit. She handled them with grace, her answers sharp yet disarming, her laugh drawing smiles. Ethan watched, proud but unsurprised. This was Sienna, brilliant, magnetic, a woman who didn't need to demand attention because it followed her naturally. Then he saw them. Ryan and Chloe stood near a coffee station, mid-conversation with a gray-haired investor. Ryan's posture was all swagger, his hand gesturing broadly, but Chloe's eyes were on the crowd, until they landed on Sienna. Her face froze, a flicker of something raw crossing it before she masked it. Ryan followed her gaze, and his grin faltered, just for a second, as he registered Ethan and Sienna approaching. Ethan felt Sienna's arm tense slightly, her only sign she'd noticed. He'd told her about Ryan and Chloe years ago, late one night when whiskey loosened his guard. She'd listened, asked nothing, just held him until the story ran dry. Now, her chin lifted, a subtle challenge in her poise. Eve, Ryan called, recovering his charm as they drew near. Didn't leash you to a panel yet? His eyes slid to Sienna, appraising. And who's this? Sienna Caldwell, she said before Ethan could answer, extending a hand. Her voice was velvet, but her grip, Ethan knew, was steel. Ethan's wife. I'm here for the biotech track. Ryan's handshake lingered a beat too long, his smile tightening. Ryan Decker. This is Chloe Lynn. Heard of you. Your gene mapping thing's making noise. Appreciate that, Sienna said, her smile polite but cool. She turned to Chloe. You're in AI, right? Read your thesis from MIT. Solid work. Chloe blinked, caught off guard. Thanks, she said, her voice softer than Ethan remembered. That was a while ago. Her eyes flicked to Ethan, then back to Sienna, searching, maybe comparing. She looked smaller somehow, her elegance overshadowed by Sienna's quiet command. Small world, Ryan cut in, his tone too bright. Ethan, you didn't mention you'd snagged a rock star. Should have known you'd level up. The compliment carried an edge, a jab dressed as praise. Ethan met his gaze unflinching. I'm lucky, he said simply, his hand resting lightly on Sienna's back. We keep each other sharp. Sienna's smile widened, just enough to sting. He's modest. Nexus wouldn't be Nexus without him. She glanced at her watch. Speaking of, I've got a session. Ethan, dinner later? Wouldn't miss it, he said, and she squeezed his arm before gliding off, already drawing eyes again. Ryan watched her go, his jaw tight. Chloe's fingers twisted around her coffee cup, her expression unreadable but strained. Ethan felt the shift. They'd expected him broken, maybe, or alone. Sienna had upended that, a mirror reflecting what they'd never anticipated. Nice catch, Ryan said, forcing a chuckle. You always did play the long game. Ethan didn't bite. See you around, he said, and walked away, the weight of their stares fading behind him. The Pinnacle Summit's third day buzzed with the urgency of closing deals and trading cards. Ethan moved through it like a ghost, his keynote looming tomorrow, but his mind snagged on yesterday's encounters. Sienna's arrival had steadied him, her presence a shield against Ryan and Chloe's orbit. Yet he couldn't unsee Chloe's strained glance, Ryan's brittle grin. Something was off, and though he told himself it wasn't his problem, curiosity, a relic of their shared past, kept tugging. He was in a breakout session on quantum computing, half listening to a droning panel, when he overheard it. Across the room, Chloe sat with Priya, Ethan's CTO from Nexus, who'd overlapped with them at MIT. Priya's laugh was loud, nostalgic, but Chloe's voice was quieter, slipping through the session's lull. I don't know, Chloe was saying, her words clipped like she was weighing each one. Sometimes I wonder if I got it wrong. Ethan, he's built something real. I didn't expect that. Ethan's pen paused over his notebook. He didn't look up, but his pulse quickened. Priya's reply was softer, lost in the panel's next slide, but Chloe's voice carried again. It's not just him. It's her. Sienna. They fit. I thought I'd be fine seeing him, but it's heavy. Priya said something about time changing things, but Ethan tuned it out, his focus split. Regret. That's what it was, raw and unguarded in Chloe's tone. Not love, not longing, but the weight of a choice she couldn't undo. He should have felt vindicated, but all he felt was a dull ache. The session ended, and he slipped out before they noticed him. In the hallway, Ryan was holding court near a coffee bar, surrounded by junior founders hanging on his every word. His laugh was loud, his gestures big, too big like an actor overplaying his role. We're closing a $20 million 0 cents round next month, he boasted, tossing out names of VCs Ethan knew. Picky. It's all about storytelling, kids. Code's just the start. One founder asked about his AI Fletchin pitch, and Ryan's smile flickered, just a fraction, before he doubled down. Disrupting trust models, he said, words smooth but rehearsed, like a script he'd recited too often. Ethan lingered at a distance, unnoticed, watching. Ryan's charm had always been effortless, but now it felt like work, each laugh a beat too forced, each pause a crack in the polish. Chloe joined them, her smile polite but thin. She touched Ryan's arm, a signal to move on, but he kept talking, oblivious or ignoring her. Her eyes darted away, landing briefly on Ethan across the hall. She froze, then looked down, her fingers tightening on her bag. Ryan didn't notice, still spinning his tail. But the disconnect was stark. Her withdrawal. His overreach. Ethan turned away, heading for a quiet lounge. He didn't need to hear more. The signs were clear, etched in their gestures. Ryan's bluster covering insecurity, Chloe's silence masking doubt. They weren't the invincible duo he'd once feared. They were human, flawed, fraying at the edges. He sat, pulling out his keynote notes, but his mind wandered. Not to revenge, he was past that, but to clarity. Their life, their choices weren't his burden anymore. Sienna found him later, her session done, her energy bright against his quiet. You look deep in it, she said, sliding into the chair beside him. Keynote nerves? He shook his head, managing a half smile. Just observing. Old ghosts, new cracks. She studied him, her gaze sharp but gentle. She didn't ask for details. She never did, trusting him to share when ready. "Whatever it is," she said, "you're bigger than it. Tomorrow you'll show them." He nodded, her words grounding him. Ryan and Chloe's tension wasn't his to fix or exploit. He'd built Nexus, a life, a love, without them. Their regrets, their friction, were theirs to carry. He flipped open his notes, Sienna's hand resting lightly on his. The summit's noise faded, and for the first time that day he felt steady, ready for what came next. The Pinnacle Summit's final day carried a weight Ethan could feel in his bones. The grand ballroom was packed, 500 attendees, from billionaire CEOs to scrappy founders, their badges glinting under chandeliers. Ethan stood backstage, his keynote minutes away, his notes a single page of bullet points he barely needed. He'd spent the night refining not just the words but the why he'd say them. Why now? This wasn't just about Nexus. It was about claiming his story, scars and all. Lila Chen introduced him, her voice booming through the mic. Ethan Caldwell, founder of Nexus, whose work is redefining how we trust data and ourselves. Applause rippled, and Ethan stepped into the spotlight, the stage vast but his stride steady. He adjusted his glasses, scanned the sea of faces. Somewhere out there were Ryan and Chloe, their presence a faint pulse in his awareness. He didn't look for them. They didn't own this moment, he did. "Good morning," he began, his voice clear, carrying the calm he'd honed over years of pitches. "I'm here to talk about Nexus, but first, I want to talk about failure. Not the kind you debug in code, but the kind that breaks you open." The room stilled, attention sharpening. He didn't dive into tech specs or market trends. Instead, he told a story, carefully stripped of names but raw in its truth. 7 years ago, I lost everything that mattered. My partner, my best friend, my belief that trust was unbreakable. They chose each other, and I was left with pieces. Anger, doubt, a life I didn't recognize. He paused, letting the words settle. The audience leaned in, some nodding, others frozen. He saw Sienna near the front, her eyes steady, anchoring him. "I could have stayed there," he continued. "Let betrayal define me. But I didn't. I moved across the country, poured my pain into code, built something not to prove them wrong, but to prove I could still create." He shifted to Nexus now, seamless but deliberate. "That's what Nexus is, a system that learns from chaos, adapts, rebuilds. It's not perfect, but it's honest. It's what I learned to be when life gutted me." He clicked to a slide, a simple graph of Nexus growth, hospitals, banks, cities relying on it. "We're not just predicting outcomes, we're building trust, one decision at a time." His voice grew firmer, not loud but fierce. "Success isn't about erasing the past. It's about building through it. I found meaning not in vengeance but in creation. In work that matters, in people who stay." He glanced at Sienna, a flicker of warmth breaking his focus. "That's what I'm here to share, not a product but a choice. To rise, not because of what you lost, but despite it." He rapped, with Nexus's vision, global scale, open APIs, ethics first. But the heart of it was done. He'd laid himself bare, not for pity, but for proof. As he said "thank you," the room erupted. Applause rolled him, hands clapping, some standing, a wave of respect that felt heavier than he'd expected. He stepped back, exhaling, the spotlight dimming. From the wings, Lila gripped his arm. "That was unreal, Ethan. You didn't just pitch, you connected." He nodded, words fit, and glanced at the crowd as they dispersed. Sienna was already moving toward him, her smile proud, but his eyes caught Ryan and Chloe, still seated near the back. Ryan's face was tight, his hands clasped, no trace of his usual swagger. Chloe's eyes were wet, her posture small, like the weight of Ethan's words had pressed her down. They didn't clap, didn't move, just watched him with something raw. Ethan turned away. Their reaction wasn't his goal. He'd spoken for himself, for the man who'd walked through fire and built something stronger. Sienna reached him, her hand slipping into his. "You were incredible," she said, voice low. "They heard you. All of them." He squeezed her hand, grounding himself. "Hope so. Felt good to say it." She studied him, seeing what others missed, the quiet toll of bearing his soul. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said, and meant it. The ache was there, but it was distant now, a scar, not a wound. He'd told his truth, not to wound them, but to free himself. The standing ovation wasn't the victory, his peace was. As they walked toward the exit, the crowd parting around them, Ethan felt the summit shift. He wasn't just a founder here. He was a man who'd rebuilt, not for revenge, but for meaning. And that was enough. The Pinnacle Summit's final hours felt like the exhale after a storm. Attendees lingered in the resort's lounge, trading last-minute contacts over coffee and wine, their voices a low hum against the crackle of a fireplace. Ethan sat alone at a corner table, reviewing emails, his keynote's echo still buzzing in his veins. He'd done what he came for, elevated Nexus, claimed his story. All that remained was a closing dinner, then a flight home with Sienna. He was ready to leave Aspen behind. A shadow fell across his screen. He looked up to find Ryan standing there. No grin, no swagger, just a man in a rumpled blazer, hands shoved in his pockets. "Ethan," he said, voice low, "can we talk?" Ethan's instinct was to say no, to walk away like he had 7 years ago. But something in Ryan's eyes, worn, unguarded, held him. He nodded, closing his laptop. "Sure." Ryan sat, hesitating, like he was searching for a script he'd never learned. "I saw your keynote," he started. "What you said, about losing everything. I know that was about us, me and Chloe." Ethan stayed silent, his face neutral. Ryan leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I messed up, man. Back then I didn't think. I loved her, and I told myself it justified everything. But I hurt you. My best friend. I'm sorry." The words landed, heavy but not sharp. Ethan had imagined this moment years ago, craved it when the pain was fresh. Now, it felt like reading an old letter, familiar but distant. "You didn't just hurt me," he said, voice even. "You broke trust. That's not small, Ryan." "I know." Ryan's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping. "I've carried it. Seeing you hear what you've built, it's a reminder. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it." Ethan studied him. The Ryan he'd known was all charm, never accountable. This version was quieter, cracked, a man facing his own limits. Before Ethan could respond, Chloe approached, her steps slow, like she was crossing a fragile bridge. She wore a gray sweater, her hair loose, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. "Ethan," she said, stopping beside Ryan, "I owe you this too. I'm sorry. For everything." He met her gaze, searching for the woman who'd once been his world. She was still there, but faded, weighed down by something he couldn't name. "Why now?" he asked, not cold but curious. Chloe sat, glancing at Ryan, then back to Ethan. "Your speech, it hit hard. You moved on, built something real. I thought I had too, but..." "Huh." She paused, fingers twisting a napkin. "I'm not as happy as I thought I'd be. I chose wrong, maybe. Not just with you, but with this." Her eyes flicked to Ryan, a confession in the gesture. Ryan flinched, but didn't interrupt. Ethan leaned back, processing. Her words weren't a plea for him. They were an admission to herself. "You don't get to rewrite it, Chloe," he said, not unkindly. "We all made choices. I lived with mine. You have to live with yours." She nodded, tears brimming but not falling. "I know. I just needed you to hear it. I hurt you, and I'll always regret that." The air held their words, fragile and final. Ethan felt no urge to lash out, no need to twist the knife. Their apologies weren't his victory. They were their reckoning. "I accept it," he said, voice firm. "Both of you, but I'm not that guy anymore. I've got my life, Sienna, Nexus. A future. You don't get to be part of it." Ryan's shoulders sagged, a mix of relief and loss. "Fair," he said. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Always was." Chloe's lips trembled, but she managed a small nod. "You deserve it, Ethan. All of it." He stood, signaling the end. "Take care," he said, meaning it in the way you wish well to strangers. They rose too, Ryan's hand brushing Chloe's arm, her response stiff. As Ethan walked away, their silhouettes blurred into the crowd, no longer his to carry. Outside, the mountain air was sharp, cleansing. He exhaled, the weight of their words lifting, not gone but lighter. Forgiveness wasn't his to give, it was theirs to seek. He already found his peace. The Pinnacle Summit's closing dinner was a blur of clinking glasses and self-congratulation, the resort's banquet hall aglow with candlelight and ambition. Ethan sat beside Sienna, his tie loosened, her hand resting lightly on his under the table. They'd navigated the evening's small talk with ease, her charming a biotech CEO, him fielding questions about Nexus's next move. But his mind wasn't on the deals, or the praise. It was on the quiet that had settled inside him, a stillness he hadn't known he'd been chasing. Ryan and Chloe's apologies lingered, not as wounds but as echoes, final notes of a song he'd stopped singing years ago. He'd seen them earlier across the room, their smiles strained as they posed for photos with a minor VC. They'd looked smaller, not in stature but in presence, like actors unsure of their lines. Ethan felt no glee, no bitterness, just a nod to the truth that their story was theirs, and his was here, with Sienna, with a life he'd built from ruin. Dinner ended and the crowd thinned, some heading to after-parties, others to pack for morning flights. Ethan and Sienna slipped away, drawn to the resort's terrace, where the aspen night stretched vast and starry above the mountains. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine, and they stood close, her shawl draped over her shoulders, his arm around her waist. The world felt theirs alone. "You were quiet tonight," Sienna said, her voice soft but probing. She tilted her head, studying him, her eyes catching the moonlight. He smiled, the kind that came easy with her. A bit of both. The speech, it was like closing a book. Ryan and Chloe, they said sorry today, both of them. Her eyebrows lifted, but she didn't tense, just waited. He loved that about her, how she listened without rushing to fix what wasn't broken. "They cornered me in the lounge," he continued, his gaze on the stars. "Ryan owned it, said he betrayed me. Chloe, she's not happy. Not with him, maybe not with herself. They wanted forgiveness, I think." Sienna's fingers tightened on his. "What did you give them?" "Acceptance," he said, the word feeling right. "I took their apologies, but I told them I've moved on. They don't get a place in this," he gestured faintly, meaning him, her, their life. "It's not about holding grudges. It's about knowing what's mine." She nodded, her expression soft but fierce. "You've earned that. Every piece of it. I saw you up there yesterday, Ethan, your keynote. You didn't just talk about Nexus. You showed them who you are. Not the guy they hurt, but the man who built something bigger." Her words warmed him, not because they praised, but because they saw. He turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You know why I could do that? Because of you. Not just your brain or your drive, though, God, those help." He laughed and she grinned, nudging him. "It's your steadiness. You make me believe I'm enough, even when I'm not sure." Sienna's eyes glistened, but her smile held. "You were always enough. The pain just made you sharper. Like fire turning ore to gold. You didn't let it burn you, you forged something with it." He pulled her closer, her warmth cutting the night's chill. "Fire to gold, huh? I like that. But it's not just me. We're the gold, Sienna. What we've got, this trust, this partnership, it's what I didn't know I could have back then." She leaned into him, her head against his chest. "Good thing we found each other then, saved us both from lesser stories." They stood there, silent for a while, the mountains a quiet witness to their peace. Ethan thought of the years behind him, the betrayal that had gutted him, the nights coding through despair, the slow climb to this moment. Pain hadn't been his enemy, it had been his teacher, stripping away naivety, teaching him to build with intention. Chloe and Ryan had been part of that lesson, but they weren't the story's end. This was, Sienna's breath against him, the future unwritten but bright. "We should go," she said eventually, pulling back with a playful tug on his jacket. "Early flight, and you owe me coffee for dragging me to this tech fest." He laughed, the sound free. "Deal, but you're buying dinner in San Francisco. I'm broke after all this networking." "Poor CEO," she teased, linking her arm with his. "Come on, let's get out of here." They walked back through the resort, past stragglers and staff clearing tables, their steps in sync. Ethan glanced at the ballroom one last time, its glow fading behind them. Ryan and Chloe might still be there, chasing their own endings, but they were shadows now, no longer his to carry. Outside, the path to their car was lined with lanterns, casting pools of light on the gravel. Sienna's hand found his, her fingers weaving through his, strong and sure. They didn't speak, didn't need to. The summit was over, the past was settled, and the road ahead was theirs. Ethan felt it. Not just closure, but completion, a cycle not ended but transformed. Hand in hand, they stepped into the night, ready for whatever came next.